people are familiar with the Monsanto case, you've probably heard that term ghostwriting. It was used very frequently. It wasn't a term invented by me or someone else, but it was used by Monsanto executives when they wanted to put forward science that would say, oh, our product, glyphosate Roundup, is so safe and it doesn't cause cancer or reproductive harm, and et cetera, et cetera. So they would ghostwrite studies, and they talked very liberally about this in numerous documents over many years for many different studies. And there was one in particular, and this was William Crozer Monroe, and this was a sweeping study that they really wanted to get out there to just say exactly that. No cancer, no reproductive harm, best thing ever, pretty much nothing to worry about whatsoever with this
You can
chemical.
drink it.
Exactly. But they didn't want it to look like it came from them. Of course, they wanted it to look like it came from independent scientists.
Welcome to Carey Handles It, a podcast where we dive into the world of personal growth, success strategies, and everything in between. I'm your host, Carey Nalbandian, and today we're going to chat with an incredible guest who has some amazing insights to share. Remember, no matter what life throws your way, I'm here to help you handle it. So let's get started.
Good afternoon, Carey. We've got Carey Gillam on the show, who is a fantastic and wonderful investigative journalist, an author, and exposes a lot of truths that we all need to know about. Carey, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Harry. I appreciate it.
Can you tell our viewers a little bit about your background and what the poster is behind you?
Oh, yeah. I've been a journalist for a long time, more than 30 years. I spent most of my career as a national correspondent in the U.S. with Reuters, international news agency. People might be familiar with that name, one of the largest and oldest. I was assigned to cover food and agriculture and a company called Monsanto way back in 1998. And didn't know anything about the company at all at that time, but came to learn a lot over the last many decades here. I've written a couple books. I've moved on. I write pretty regularly for The Guardian now, and I also manage an environmental news outlet called The New Lead that writes about sort of the intersection between public health and environmental health.
I mean, the work that you've done and the work that you do, that investigative journalists do, really lay the groundwork for people like me who represent people who are hurt by these companies who otherwise would have never known about what the real cause was. So really, thank you for doing the work that you do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. You ask about the book covers. You can't really see them, but those are the covers from two of my books. And both of them dealt with Monsanto and its weed killer glyphosate. A lot of people know it as Roundup, but which, has become really in the news over the last several years because so many people have sued. Over 100,000 in the United States have brought lawsuits claiming that their exposure to Monsanto's glyphosate weed killers caused them to develop non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And the company Bayer, which bought Monsanto in 2018, right on the eve of the first trial, has suffered, quite substantially because of its acquisition of Monsanto and all of the verdicts and the settlements that have derived from that litigation.
Can you tell our viewers about the beginning of that story, how you first started investigating glyphosate and its dangers?
Yeah, it was, as I said, I started covering Monsanto for Reuters back in 1998. And at that time, everybody thought the company was bringing out the latest and greatest. There was a lot of controversy over the genetically engineered crops, GMOs, that they were rolling out and developing. But they had this weed killer, Roundup. It has other names. Glyphosate is the main active ingredient. Monsanto introduced that in the 1970s, and it was is a very highly effective weed killer. It was marketed as being much safer than others that were on the market, and it quickly became popular with farmers when Monsanto introduced these GMOs that could be sprayed directly over the top with glyphosate weed killers, and the crops would survive, but the weeds would die. Farmers loved it. Usage took off. Glyphosate became the world's most widely used weed killer. So I'm writing about all the market moves and how it was really changing the way we grow food, not only in the U.S. but around the world. what kinds of crops were grown, how they were grown, and how much weed killer and pesticide was used. And I just, started following the science, and more scientists began researching the health and environmental impacts of glyphosate, and then, the news wasn't good. And I kept writing about this, and Monsanto didn't like it, and I kept writing about it anyway. Um, I became one of the only reporters. I was really one of the first to write about the health hazards that were becoming more and more apparent through, scientific study and published peer-reviewed literature. And it became apparent too that Monsanto was working to hide that research and to manipulate the public and manipulate consumers, manipulate and collude sometimes even with regulators. And it all came to be in my first book, Whitewash, which came out in 2017. Yeah, so fall of 2017, before the first trial that took place in June of 2018. And, a lot of reporters before the first trial were skeptical and thought, this doesn't cause cancer. What are you talking about, Carey? You're just, you're crazy. And after the trial and after all of this, came to light in a bigger way, people really changed. And it's funny, that first book, Whitewash, which is pretty scientific, it's a pretty heavy read. Went on to win some awards and got attention all around the world. Who knew people would care about a weed killer? But I think it's emblematic. Really, the story is of a very large and powerful company. A very profitable product that touches the lives of so many people. Through the food we eat, even the air we breathe. Glyphosate's been found in air samples, water samples. Its ubiquitous use has made it almost impossible to escape. And the health impacts are very real and very dire for certain, people who suffer now these cancers and other health impacts. So, the story was one of a company knowledgeable about these risks and working very, very hard to hide the risks. And we see that over and over and over again. I say Monsanto is really the poster child for this much bigger problem that we see with companies that market products, even when they know that they're harmful.
When you were exposing these truths, writing these papers, writing the book, what kind of backlash did you feel like you got from Monsanto or any of its partners who were trying, you know, to run the cover up?
Yeah, I mean, well, I lived it. I wrote about it. I experienced it. A lot of other people have as well. But Monsanto, like many big companies, sort of has a machine that they roll out and a playbook for attacking people like me, a journalist or a scientist or anyone who's bringing information to light that they feel is a threat to their agenda, their profit agenda. And, they came after me. They tried to get me fired at Reuters. They tried to interfere with stories. They lobbied editors. They tried to get me pulled off the beat. They went after my book when it came out. There was a coordinated, attack on Amazon reviews. And we were actually able to get internal documents from the company that showed they had a Carey Gillam book plan and all of the different stages to try to discredit this. And they fund third party entities that write horrible things about people like me online. That I'm a Russian activist trying to undermine confidence in the American food supply and things like that. So
Sounds
yeah,
like a similar playbook that the American people have heard before.
yeah. I mean, they just come after you. They come after anybody, and it does work. If it creates uncertainty in your job or for certain scientists, if they get pushback on papers or they don't get funding, it can create a lot of fear and can silence people that they go after, and that's why they do it.
It didn't work for you. Do you
It
do you
didn't
have
work.
any do you have any insight? I mean, the grit, the perseverance, the goal, I mean, what did it take to get through all that and still end up on the side that you did?
I mean, it was certainly. I mean, this went on for years. It doesn't. It's sort of over now, but it did go on for years. Years of harassment, online harassment, threats. They would send trolls to stalk me at book events where I would be speaking, to heckle me or harass me. If you go onto some of these third-party sites, which I really don't want to name, but that they fund. You can read a whole litany of attacks against me. They stalked me at the European Parliament when I was asked to speak in Brussels, about the findings of my investigation. It was very stressful. There was a time when I did fear for my life, just a brief moment when I was getting threats, to my physical safety. But
That's
that's all kind of past. But it is a lot for someone, to bear. I guess I kind of had the personality, or I was raised to this: more somebody pushes me, the more I want to push back, which isn't always the smartest approach, but so it didn't really work for me. But certainly I know of other journalists and scientists in particular who really have retreated from this area of scrutiny because of the pressure that they received.
wow. When you were investigating this, what was it like to go down the deep end, go through the company's internal documents to try to find, some of the things that they were doing to try to hide the scientific data that was coming out about glyphosate?
Yeah, yeah. I always would describe it sort of as jaw dropping. There were moments where you're just reading these internal conversations and you're just like, I can't even believe. Um, there are so many of them, but one incident, I guess. I mean, it took place over many years, but had to do with ghostwriting. And if people are familiar with the Monsanto case, you've probably heard that term ghostwriting. It was used very frequently. It wasn't a term invented by me or someone else, but it was used by Monsanto executives when they wanted to put forward science that would say, "Oh, our product glyphosate Roundup is so safe and it doesn't cause cancer or reproductive harm," and et cetera, et cetera. Um, so they would ghostwrite studies, and they talked very liberally about this in numerous documents over many years, for many different studies. And there was one in particular, and this was William Croson Monroe, and this was a sweeping study that they really wanted to get out there to just say exactly that: no cancer, no reproductive harm, best thing ever, pretty much nothing to worry about whatsoever with this
You could
chemical.
drink it.
Exactly. But they didn't want it to look like it came from them, of course. They wanted it to look like it came from independent scientists. And so you see all of these discussions internally about all the work that they are doing, Monsanto, their own people are doing for like 3 years to get this paper to publication that will carry the names of these three independent scientists. And they're so proud of themselves when they finally get done and they finally get it published and they put all this work into it. They're going to have a party and they're going to have a celebration at Monsanto to celebrate this independent paper that they have worked so hard and so long on. And they're getting like commemorative polo shirts, to celebrate this event. So the lack of sort of any sort of shame or humility, that is so apparent in this. It just was so embedded in the culture, that I think they lost track of ethics and morality, at a
Where
certain
the
point.
right side is. Yeah. Wow. Was there a certain number of dollars that they had spent to try to fund these studies that came out through your research?
There was one sort of point, and it wasn't really to fund the studies, but it was sort of in this catch-all sort of marketing, or protect our freedom to operate and kind of thing. And I think it was 1 year, and this is all getting a little fuzzy now, but it was just a 1 year budget. It was like $17 million or something, just to put into kind of tamping down people like me, or trying to suppress information they didn't like. And I remember the Judge Shabria, in the first trial, and he was overseeing the MDL, and he was looking at this information, and he was like, if you had spent, this is 1 year, if you had spent half the money you spend on trying to suppress information, on just trying to make your product safer, or trying to protect the public and your customer, you wouldn't even be in this situation.
That's wild.
Yeah. That
um,
first trial was wild. In June, it was the Lee Johnson, the very first person to go to trial, and he was not expected to live very long, which is why he was designated as sort of the bellwether or the first. And that was June of 2018, and it was the almost the same week that Bayer, the German company, closed on its acquisition of Monsanto. And
Interesting.
I just always find that so revealing, I think, because the Monsanto executives clearly had seen this storm coming, right? And they knew what lay ahead. And it seemed that Bayer was just oblivious to the dangers. And the trial ended August 10th. The jury came back, $289 million verdict for this first trial. Subsequently followed by more verdicts in favor of plaintiffs, including $2 billion off jury awarded to a husband and wife who both suffered non-Hodgkin lymphoma after using these products. And Bayer has never recovered. Its stock tanked. The investors are furious. They forced out the CEO. They've paid out close to $15 billion in settlements, and they continue to have cases going to trial. It was I think the Wall Street Journal, or perhaps it was Washington Post, called it the worst acquisition in corporate history.
That's literally buying a landmine.
Yeah, there literally was, yes.
So obviously, you don't think it was a big coincidence that Monsanto disappeared the first week, that the first bellwether case was going to trial.
Monsanto clearly knew what was ahead. I mean, the lawsuits were started to be filed in 2015 after the International Agency for Research on Cancer declared glyphosate a probable human carcinogen. So the lawsuits were rolling. And Monsanto saw the writing on the wall and got out and got a pretty penny for it. And Bayer's still holding the bag on that.
They're holding the bag.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the process like investigating this? Did you have to interview people in the company who maybe didn't want to speak up, but did because they felt that it was the right thing to do?
No one in Monsanto spoke up. And I will say, as a corporate reporter, I mean, I covered the insurance industry, the banking industry, commercial real estate industry. You could almost always find someone, if wrongdoing was occurring, you could almost always find someone to talk. Monsanto was locked down. There were a lot of people that I knew the people really, really well. I think I spent a lot of time at Monsanto as a reporter for Reuters, millions and millions of readers around the world. Companies like Monsanto would welcome us into their headquarters and would, spend a lot of time and energy to try to woo us and teach us, myself and other journalists, about how to report on their products and how to report on, what was happening in the world through their lens and their perspective. And so I did spend a lot of time there with, their chief science officers and, their plant breeding people, and, even their CEO, Hugh Grant, through many years. So, I knew the people and I had been there. But as I said, the relationship changed from the wooing, the carrot, I suppose, to the stick. After 2 years,
Awful.
they were actively calling and yelling at me and threatening me and that sort of thing. So, but no, the reporting process was primarily relying on, interviews, of course, with farmers and scientists and regulators and, everyone involved in the process. But documents and data drove the day. I think, as they always do in investigative reports. I was fortunate enough to be able to access a lot of internal EPA documents, FDA, USDA. Had to file a couple lawsuits against the EPA and the FDA to actually get documents, but we got a lot of documents. And I was the first reporter to receive the big document dump when the lawyers in the Roundup litigation got these papers out from under seal. That was a really, if you've read the second book, the Monsanto Papers, that was a really dramatic moment. That whole case. That's my second book is about the first case, the Johnson versus Monsanto case. And it was like straight out of a movie. There were so many dramatic turning points to that, both in the courtroom and outside the courtroom. But that document dump was one that was really just, it was one stroke after midnight, on August 1st, I think it was. Um, and we, got the documents. I got the documents and immediately started uploading them to a website so that, once Monsanto awoke in the morning and saw that these documents that they did not want made public were out in the world, that they couldn't claw them back. And they did, of course, try to claw them back and ask the judge to come after me and the whole thing.
Oh, well,
But
justice prevailed, it seems like.
we got those documents up and out,
Yeah.
and yeah. And when you put those together with the internal communications from the different federal agencies and universities and others, you know, it's a damning story, which is why you have these jury verdicts that you see.
Yeah, I mean, these are regular people who listen to these stories, who realize that an injustice was done. And the verdicts are what ordinary people decide that they are, which is something the tort reform community doesn't like to talk about, but they just like to talk about the big number and the big verdicts. But really, the reasoning behind them, it's pretty
Yeah.
sound.
And in these roundup, we just had in Georgia 10 days now ago or so, 2 weeks, another $2 billion verdict for plaintiff in a Roundup case, case where the man has non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And again, it's this, you have all this science that links this chemical to this cancer, in particular NHL, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. But even if you have any uncertainty on that, then when you load onto that all of these documents and all of this internal evidence about how hard the company fought to hide those risks, and to manipulate the science, I think it raises the question. It probably not only angers the jurors, the ones I've spoken to, certainly what they say, but it also raises the question: if your product is really safe, you wouldn't have to create science. You wouldn't have to manipulate and hide and confuse people intentionally and try to silence critics, right? Your product is safe. It should appear to be safe, and the science should support that.
Yeah, big time. Do you remember what the first piece of evidence or information was that really got you looking in that direction of, hey, there's something up with this?
Well, there was so much research coming out, 2008, 2009, 2010. I mean, that's how I really became more intrigued. There was just more and more research indicating that this was not good, right? And these high levels that were being pushed out into the environment could be dangerous. And then these connections through both toxicology and epidemiology were connecting that. One of the most, I guess, interesting things early on was this 1985 mouse study that was actually paid for by Monsanto. It was a company study that was submitted to the EPA. It was not ever published for public view. This was simply a requirement that they had to submit this kind of study to the EPA. And they did it. And the EPA scientists, I had gotten all of these documents from EPA archives dating back to the 1980s. And the scientists at EPA, see this study and they say, oh, well, this looks like it could cause cancer because like these mice are all getting cancer, when you dose them with glyphosate. So it looks like it's oncogenic, could cause cancer. We should probably classify it as such. And Monsanto loses its mind, is absolutely not. You're misreading the data. Let us bring someone in to teach you how to look at the data correctly, this sort of thing. And this goes on and on. And the scientists were so convinced, they refused to sign off on anything other than, their original analysis on this. But Monsanto was able to convince managers within EPA to change the findings of the EPA's own scientists and to eventually side with Monsanto and to say that it looked like it didn't cause cancer. But so those, that was very, very early on. But that was quite shocking uh, to see that and to see that, that had been buried, that had never been part of the public record um, that anybody had known about. So, there was that. There were all sorts of other scientific studies. One of their, lead scientists talking internally about, we can't say it doesn't cause cancer. We can't say that. We need to be saying different things. Just a lot of effort to manipulate and control the rhetoric around its product.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for bringing that to light and bringing that to public because you know, a lot of people like to believe that the companies do no wrong and they could do no evil. But when you see things like this, um, it really goes to show you how far people can go to achieve their objective, even if it's the wrong move, even if it's unethical, even if it could hurt thousands and hundreds of thousands of people.
It's all about profit, right? It's all about profit. We've seen it in tobacco, opioid. You've seen it with industrial chemicals, oil and gas, plastics industry. You see it in food and beverage industry. Unfortunately, I as a reporter covering sort of these issues, you see it all the time, and it really is frightening to a degree. The levels that corporate actors go to many times to push products that we know, automobiles that are unsafe, all sorts of things like that. We have, Syngenta now, which is another big company, a competitor of Monsanto and Bayer. They're facing very similar with, again, a weed killer, but their weed killer has been associated with causing Parkinson's disease. And, I've written quite a bit about that as well, was able to get a whole lot of internal documents. Same thing, they knew back in the 70s that this chemical cross the blood-brain barrier and interferes with the brain. I'm going to forget the name of it now, but the specific types of the brain neurons, the dopamine-producing neurons in the brain, are affected by this chemical and effectively killed by this chemical and cause these Parkinson-like, symptoms to develop. And they knew this long ago. And there's a 1985-ish, 4-ish memo that talks about, oh my gosh, we don't want to have this legacy of Parkinson's because of our chemical. Would be much like asbestos. They likened it to the legacy of asbestos. And we have a court case going on right now in North Carolina with Chemours, which is a spinoff of DuPont, with harmful PFAS chemicals, which have been shown to be, some of them to be highly toxic. And right now, the court is facing the question of to seal these documents or not seal these documents, about what the company knew, when it knew, what it did about the risks that it was seeing. And, the judge, if you look at most judges around Reuters actually did this, but if you look at a lot of these product liability cases around the country, judges quite often side with the companies in sealing this information. It's usually very difficult to get information, even when it goes through a court. And of course, a court is supposed to be a public forum. We, the taxpayers, pay for those courts, right? Pay the judges' salaries. But too often, judges are agreeing with the companies and helping them hide this information. So that's something I've seen that definitely we think needs to be addressed.
I mean, along those same lines, it's a little shocking to hear that a company submits something to government agencies like the EPA who are supposed to protect us, and the EPA scientists say, no, 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 this is bad. But the managers, being people,
Hmm.
can be motivated to come up with a different conclusion to help the companies. So
Hmm.
as the people, like, where do we turn to find help? You know?
Journalists,
Yes. Thank you.
lawyers, right? No. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you see a lot of that, right? You see public advocacy groups, you see activists, you see others who are engaged and are aware and follow this and try to, make changes or push for changes. And I think we have awareness growing perhaps in federal courts and in our federal lawmakers, some of them maybe you're seeing some of growing awareness in states. Iowa just turned down. Iowa lawmakers just rejected a bill there that would protect companies like Bayer and Syngenta, that would protect them from these types of lawsuits. They're pushing those in states all around the country right now, pushing measures that, if passed, Georgia actually did pass one, would effectively give them immunity, or would make it much more difficult for people to sue them if their products allegedly injure these people.
Yeah. Do you see some of the same players who were working against the truth about glyphosate also working behind the scenes in some of these other measures? Uh,
Oh, well, the state measures, for the immunity is how people refer to it, to protect these companies is pushed by Bayer. It's a Bayer agenda, that they have talked about and acknowledged that it's their idea and their effort, and they're pushing to get this put into the farm bill, at the federal level. But they really, they're saying lawyers are exploiting people and creating false narratives about their products, and that they need to be protected, or else they won't be able to make and sell these wonderful products. So they are pushing for these laws. And as I said, Georgia's legislature did recently pass such a law, and the governor signed it. It will take effect soon.
that was recently, right?
Yes.
Um, well, this was an amazing conversation, Carey. Can you tell our listeners about how to find you, get in touch, where to find your books?
Yeah, sure. The books are the Monsanto Papers. I should have had a better background there where you could actually see them. The Monsanto Papers and Whitewash, the story of a weed killer, cancer, and the corruption of science. And as I said, Whitewash is a little heavy read. Academics love it. Monsanto Papers is, I would say, a fun read. It's more written like
The story.
like a legal thriller. And actually, there are some people making a movie, they say, based on that first trial, that so you could read the book and watch the movie one day on Netflix, maybe. You can find me at thenewlead.org, LEDE. I also write for The Guardian Carey Gillam, and I have a website, careygillam.com, where you can find out more. So I appreciate you having me, though.
Thank you, Carey. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Harry Handles It. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and found some valuable takeaways. If you're facing challenges in your own life or business, remember that you're not alone. Together, we can handle anything that comes our way. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you liked what you heard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and handling life with confidence.